Sweet Christmas jive turkeys, and welcome to the JonesCast. Actually, no, welcome to the AKA JonesCast. And actually, we have our new intro, which is, it's Mozz, it's Chaz, and we really want to be your friends. Welcome to the AKA JonesCast. Okay, I did that now, because that's going to come back, I think, in the next episode where we get that song sung from the show. But I realized today we are, because Iron Fist premieres March 14th. We're recording this February 7th. We do these once a week. We're not going to finish Jones on time, and I wanted to get that in. That was written by Phil Parrish, one of my other podcast friends.
Ah, nice. Thanks, Phil.
And the reason I threw this in here, because this is where we first get this episode, AKA, AKA It's Called Whiskey. Yes, AKA It's Called Whiskey. Season 1, episode 3 of Jessica Jones. We get the big reveal that Trish, from Trish Talk, is none other than world famous comic book celebrity Patsy Walker. And this, I knew Patsy Walker was in there. I knew Patsy Walker was going to be in there. I knew what they were going to be doing as her basic origin in this, and I was so pleased by every choice they made. But of course, we get the scene here where after the radio interview, she gets approached by one of her many adoring fans, and he's got the Patsy Walker comic book, and he says, "I loved it when you had the red hair." And
so what's the deal with that? I don't know what the story is with that. Can you explain that to me?
Well, so here's the story of Patsy Walker. Patsy Walker was one of the first Marvel Comics characters. And she was essentially Marvel's answer to... And she was actually kind of timely, but it was kind of like timely when they were first moving into Marvel. When they were rebranding themselves as Marvel. And she was essentially their Archie Andrews. She was essentially, because Archie was big at that time. This is just before the big start of the big superhero boom after the return of Justice League.
Interesting.
And so Patsy Walker was real big for Marvel, and she was and it was basically, it was like Riverdale. You know, she was this teen getting into wacky adventures with her friends. She had her best frenemy, which was Hetty Wolf. And Patsy was the redhead, the fun-loving redhead, and Hetty Wolf was the sort of, you know, the brunette who basically rather than doing a story about Archie and that, they actually did a story about just Betty and Veronica as the primary characters of their series, which, hey, for what it's worth, real progressive for the time that they made it a female-centric story. In a female-centric universe, yeah, you know, I mean, I'm sure they were still doing crazy girl adventures, but you know what? For what it's worth, at that point in history, Marvel had that. One of their big characters at that same time was, of course, the goddess Venus, which was sort of this cross between romance and action-adventure comics, where you had the goddess Venus coming to Earth and having adventures. She fought Loki once. Did she win? Yeah, this was back before Thor was a thing, but they actually had, if you actually look at, like, if you go to, like, the Marvel Comics database and you see what is Loki's first appearance, you see him, it's like Venus number 5, back in, like, 1959, because he actually premieres before Thor. So continuity-wise, he's still the guy. Now he's much more, you know, trolly as a Loki, but still. But that was Marvel at the time. And so, but Patsy Walker was this character. And when they first came up with the superhero thing, as sort of a little meta joke, Stan Lee would put Patsy Walker and Hetty Wolf into background scenes. Well, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would. Because Stan Lee wrote actually a lot of the Patsy Walker stories. Also did Millie the Model, which is a character who does come up every so often in Marvel Comics every so often. You gotta look for her, but she shows up every now and again. But anyway, but this is what's fascinating about Patsy. Years and years later, Because, of course, what happened is that all the kids who grew up reading all of Stan and Jack's old books eventually became the guys who started creating the comic books. And they wanted to bring in these characters. And what they did, and one writer, and I can't remember his name, I want to say it was Grunwald, but I don't think it was Mark Grunwald. But that's who's jumping into my head right now. But they decided that, you know what? Here was this character who was this big comic book character. And they decided that what she's going to want to do is she's going to want to get in on this new big superhero thing. And she steals herself a super suit. Not dissimilar to what we saw Diamondback using in Luke Cage, although not as bulky, because it was, a skin-tight yellow and blue cat suit. But that conferred cat powers on you, and she became the Hellcat. And that was the Patsy Walker story. And now, of course, we have here with Patsy Walker, we already know she's doing her Krav Maga. She is a hardcore person ready to fight. There's for what it's worth, there's a lot of great little things in this episode that if you are a fan of the comics and want to go deep into it, this is where you start to get these first hints of what it is. You don't get the big reveals until later, because even here, you see the Patsy Walker comic, you get that she's Patsy, but they don't really put a pin in it yet. You really have to do the work to get to it. The other character we get here is Officer Simpson. And he is real important. Just want to see who plays him here. Yes, Will Travel is Will Simpson. He is actually. Well, you want me to spoil it for you, Mozz?
Yeah.
Okay. In the comics, this character is the Vietnam-era Captain America.
Oh.
And he eventually goes nuts. Basically, that was in that story. He eventually went nuts. He actually wound up being a Daredevil villain. So I get the feeling we're going to see him back in Defenders.
Oh, cool.
Yes, but he gets a real neat. He has a neat arc in this. He has a neat arc in this.
Does he develop powers?
I don't want to spoil that to you, but you're going to see some stuff, and there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we're going to get with him, but yeah, basically, I'll give it to you right now. The character in the comic books was part of a super soldier experiment. That recreation of the old Steve Rogers formula, that goes poorly, and we do touch back with this. We don't get to, Here's the thing about about the Marvel Universe, and especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You open it up with this idea that there was a guy called Steve Rogers who was the first Avenger. And somehow someone was able to verifiably, scientifically, make him into a super soldier. And then then if you think about it, how would that affect the entire world if you one day had a super soldier? Well, the obvious thing is, if you live in a scientific world, everyone's going to try and recreate it. And so almost everything you see from Luke Cage on down, it's people trying to recreate a super soldier.
Right.
Following whatever trying to piece together Erskine's original formula. No one can do it. But anyway, but that's our fan service. Now the actual storyline here, what we get, how does this episode open? Oh, actually, let me just throw this in here. Tonight's episode was directed by David Petrarca, and it was written by Liz Friedman, Melissa Rosenberg, and Scott Reynolds. Okay, I'm trying to remember what our opening scene was.
It's the love scene between the two of them.
Oh yeah, that's right. So we go back to that a lot in this. So we start open up with Luke and Jessica.
Yeah.
And they are making love, as we say,
in a way that they probably never have before.
Yeah, because, when we left off at the last episode, they both realized they had powers, and now they're going to really let it go. And we're going to break the bed and say, Sweet Christmas. And it's a fascinating thing about how sex is used in this episode, because it is a very... I mean, on one level, it is absolutely a male fantasy, the woman that just, wants to deal with her stress through sex, but... At no point do I ever feel that it's a false note with these two.
No.
And that's the thing. I really feel like, for what it's worth, Kristen Ritter gives such power to this character where, and honestly, this is such a great series about living with PTSD, living with the difficulties of trauma.
Right.
And, the way Kristen handles it is amazing. The way the writers have presented it is amazing. And all throughout, the whole thing is just a real strong story that we get to watch. And, as it opens up, so the idea that our central conceit of this episode, as we're doing our research, as we're trying to find what's going on with Kilgrave, etc., we have two basic parallel plots. They've discovered Kilgrave's kryptonite, which is this high-power surgical anesthetic that essentially shuts off your brain. And so Jessica's now trying to locate this anesthetic.
Fentanyl.
Very good. Ask for it by name. And, first she goes to Hogarth's wife, who, God bless her, still believes in love. We'll see how far that gets you in this universe, chickie.
Is she aware of the... Oh, yeah, she is aware of the mistress.
Yeah, no, she knows. You know what? Hey, one's a high-powered doctor, one's a high-powered lawyer in New York City, You're living at that level, man. You don't worry about affairs. You worry about building a life. At least that's what she's worried about. Hogarth is worried about an affair. Oh, Hogarth. We love you, but you're being mean to this nice lady who loves you. So you're being so mean to Wendy Ross Hogarth, played by Robin Weigert. And you notice that Ross took Hogarth. Hogarth didn't take Ross. Oh, I wonder if she's related to General Ross. That would be cool.
Ooh.
Yeah, that could be fun. Anyway, so she goes to Wendy to try and get the drug, and basically Wendy shoots her down because she's not, a drug dealer, and basically gives her the speech. Me and my wife, we're gonna find our way through, and I'm not going to throw my relationship away, just to solve your problem,
Right.
and also doesn't necessarily believe her, basically gives her a prescription for antipsychotics. And then what happens? Then we find out that basically Hogarth has gotten a deal, has made it, because we know that. So Trish, Patsy Walker, whom I love,
right.
has this like the highest rated show in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Market One Radio, and it's probably syndicated. She's like Martha Stewart with Howard Stern. So Howard Stern's ratings with Martha Stewart's lifestyle power, and powerful brand Trish Walker, which explains how she can afford that nice safe room fortress apartment. And basically they're going to have the victim, Hope Schlotman, played by Erin Moriarty, on the show as a live feed from prison. And you get this great bit here with Hope and Hogarth and Trish, where they're having their conversation about everything, and Hope is going to this whole thing about, yes, he made me do it, yada yada yada. And of course, what's important to remember is Trish knows about Kilgrave, because she knows Patsy went through this. Or not Patsy, she knows Jessica went through this. And then Hogarth, at the end of it, says, and so as you can see, my client's delusion is so intense. And she's like, what, you don't believe her? And goes into this whole thing about, well, who could believe a man who can control minds? He says, well, a year ago we didn't believe that aliens could invade Manhattan. And again, no one mentions the Hulk destroying Harlem. It really bugs me, especially because they specifically mention the Hulk destroying Harlem in the Avengers. When the Hulk shows up in Harlem, in the Avengers, he does say, well, the last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem. And yet now we're in Harlem, we're in New York, and no one is mentioning that. It's bugging me, and it bugs me more and more every day. Although I guess maybe aliens kind of trump a Hulk. The alien invasion was bigger. Or, as folks will say, man, people remember the aliens because it happened to white people. Hulk and Abomination blowing up Harlem, no one even noticed. It's like, that's just that Jack McGee again, telling his crazy outlandish stories. But downtown Manhattan, suddenly white people are concerned.
Now it's a tragedy. Now it's a sad to see.
Exactly. And again,
having this happening.
And as I'll always say, you're always trying to build that wall against the aliens. 90% of the destruction on the planet comes from domestic, earthbound superhumans. Just saying. I have no idea if that's all true. Although you did have all of S.H.I.E.L.D. sort of as existing at that point to try and keep the superhuman menace under wraps. But somehow Kilgrave slipped through the cracks. In the interview, Trish calls out Kilgrave, basically, calling him impotent and, all this, basically, describing him as a Trump, if you will. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get political. But basically, saying he's a control freak and probably a coward and all these kinds of things. And then who calls into the radio station, Mozz?
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
The sultry British accent.
Oh, yes, he calls in and says...
It's interesting, how do his powers work, though? Can he just suggest somebody? Does he need to be within, visual distance of them, or as long as they hear his voice, or
well, they do reveal that later on.
No, that part.
In the comic book, it's pheromone based, so he actually has to be. You have to be able to be in the room with him. It won't work long distance. It's not like telepathy. So, so in this case, it is. He doesn't have any power over anyone in this room over the radio. Although, I think what the point is that he triggers, Hope and Jessica at the same time. They both freak out once they hear his voice, So when they hear his voice, it brings it all back to them, and it's a real heavy, scary thing.
Right. But doesn't he say, why are you egging me on? I could just make you kill yourself.
Well, what he says, and of course he's not quite so obvious. Although that is absolutely, yes, his implication. He says, you're really antagonizing someone with these kind of powers. If you really thought this person had these kinds of powers, that's a stupid move. And of course, Jessica's like, that's a stupid move, Trish. But Trish, she's got that white woman privilege, no one can harm me, view of the world. And of course, everyone starts to freak out a bit. And as they're leaving the studio, that's when we get approached by the well-meaning fan who, grabs her, which is just, okay, first off, don't care how big of a fan you are, you do not touch a celebrity without permission, okay?
Right. Or anybody, really.
Yeah, well, really, anyone. Anyone. I don't care who it is. You don't touch a person without the permission. And of course, this for this guy's trouble, he gets a big face full of Krav Maga.
Right. Well, and especially in New York, you get.
Yeah, honestly, here's what I'm gonna say: the guy had it coming. Honestly, I don't care how well-meaning of a nerd he was, he had it coming. He walked up to a woman, out of nowhere, And he doesn't know him from her sister Sam. Honestly, this could have really... He didn't have to be a mind-controlled Kilgrave bot to be a danger to Trish Walker, because Trish Walker is a professional celebrity. She is someone who has she has a lifestyle, so she had been basically she was, a teen Disney star. She's basically, a grown-up Miley Cyrus is what we're going to be getting in her basic origin in this story. But without so much, whipped cream. Without such an affinity for Zappa. See, that's the thing most people don't get about Miley Cyrus. Everyone's always like, oh, Miley Cyrus, she's da-da-da-da. It's like, really, if you realize that she's just a huge fan of Frank Zappa, and you look at Frank Zappa's stage show, you realize that Miley Cyrus, it's all these homages to Zappa. She just really got that Dadaist Zappa, which, of course, Lady Gaga, who was, again, a very big Dadaist, embraced, but it was like, oh, it's just crazy, nonsensical sex. It's like, no, it's crazy, yes, but there's a lot of sense to the crazy. So, Zappa used to come out riding on a giraffe that would shoot whipped cream out of its head.
Oh, nice.
No one ever gave him stuff about it. But you're a teen girl and used to be a Disney princess. Suddenly you're the problem. So if you have a broader pop cultural lens, you can get into what it is Miley Cyrus is doing. And it's actually, it's some pretty interesting games she's playing with the idea of sexuality and things. Anyway.
Yeah, it's far more sophisticated than people give her credit for.
Yeah. Well, they always are, who knew Cyndi Lauper was a really deep singer when she was just singing about girls just wanting to have fun? And then you actually look at like mature Cyndi Lauper now, and she's like, oh wow, yeah, you're like this really great, smoky, deep singer, and it's like there's all these levels to your performance now that you didn't realize when you were kind of stuffed into that teen pop star mold,
Right.
Anyway, so Trish goes back home. Jess goes back home. Jess finds, of course, Malcolm, who is stoned out of his gourd.
Yeah.
And you get a nice bit here with Malcolm and Jess, where Jess kind of throws Malcolm to the wolves, if you will. She's gonna, because basically, our friend, it's funny, when he's talking about the Beatles, what did you think he was talking about?
I didn't. Remind me what that line was.
Oh, so her upstairs neighbor was saying like he was in his room with his Beatles collection.
Uh-huh.
So okay.
Oh. How interesting.
See, when I heard that, I thought he was actually talking about Beatles, like the Bugs. It comes out I
didn't catch that.
Yeah, well, I caught that because I thought they were going to do a whole thing with See, here's the thing: when you're a huge Marvel nerd like I am, every single character like, oh, is that this character? Is that this character? And they're almost never that character. So I'm thinking, are they going to do a humbug thing with him where he's like all obsessed with Beatles? And it's like, no, he likes the band The Beatles. John Lennon and Paul McCartney. That's what he was referring to. And I did not realize that for like 6 episodes later when they talk about how he got his headphones so that he could enjoy the Beatles better. I thought it was Bugs, but no, it's the perfectly legitimate fan of being a rock band. So
something a druggie would be into.
Yes. So well, no, this isn't the druggie. That Malcolm's the druggie. This is the neighbor who him and his sister are always fighting. Yeah, the upstairs neighbor. And so Jess takes Malcolm. Well, after he mentions like, yeah, I guess he's a real scary guy if you don't know him, And she decides to take Malcolm to a hospital and tosses him at
some nurses.
Yeah, at some nurses to cause a distraction so she can steal the drug.
Now the look of betrayal on his face, my God, that was potent.
Yeah,
I mean, it sort of reminded me of. You ever seen Braveheart?
Actually, no. I have.
Oh, there's a great scene where Robert the Bruce betrays him, and William Wallace falls off his horse, and the look of just disbelief and the hurt at the betrayal is just so powerful, and it reminded me of that scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. But it is very powerful. And yeah, and honestly, it really cuts you, and you can see that it cuts Jessica too.
Yeah.
You can see she's getting like, yeah, I know I am a horrible human being for what I did, because I did, and for what it's worth, it is this idea of treating someone else the way you've been treated.
Yeah.
She treated him as maybe not as a plaything, but as an object, as a tool for her ends, a way not dissimilar to the way that Kilgrave had treated her, as just not a human being, but just a thing.
Right. Yeah, to her, he was like a pet too, you know?
Yeah, well, exactly. Anyway, so of course, then we cut back to Trish. There's a cop there, says, I want to talk to you about this incident, da-da-da-da-da. And, of course, Patsy lets him in. Did you think that was going to be a big mistake when she did it? Or was it...
I mean, it really, really felt like it. They were building the tension up, and I was like, no, you can't let him in. Because it's like, once you tease the audience with that idea of whether or not you can trust him, we're not going to trust him no matter what.
Exactly.
And that was my, so I was like, no, don't let him in. And I thought it was weird that the guy that was a fan of hers would press charges. That didn't seem right to me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you know what else?
That can't be
you
good.
know what else is telling in that scene? It's only one cop. Cops
never
go. You always, if you watch Law and Order, it's always the two cops, and that's
a great point.
That's important on a lot of levels. First off, it just always ensures that there is another cop to corroborate your story if something happens, and it also lets you, as an interrogation technique, if you're going to talk to someone, it allows you to triangulate them. Because you can do good cop, bad cop, which is, for what it's worth, for anyone who wants to talk about torture, good cop, bad cop is 1,000 times proved to be the most effective way to get anyone to talk about anything. Is you have got one guy pushing one way and one guy saying, hey, look, I feel for you, man. I know that. Let's just try and get your story out there.
Yeah.
So if you ever see one cop come up to you, you are in trouble. Because basically that's a cop who's saying, I'm going to do something I don't want anyone to corroborate.
Right.
And, of course, that's what happens. He attacks Trish. Of course, Trish holds her own against this guy.
Yeah.
And now, like I said, this is Will
that
Simpson.
training's been paying off.
In the comic book, he's a Captain America. So even though she does hold her own, and for what it's worth, that tells you that she is all set to be a freaking superhero in her own right. She holds off him, holds him at bay for the most part until he does get the power on her. When they go to the ground, as a fan of mixed martial arts will tell you, as my good friend Mozz is, they go to the mat and he's got the advantage of the weight on her there, and he does get the advantage until, of course, from out of the ring jumps Jessica Jones. She tags in and really just tosses him like a rag doll.
Yeah.
And then she uses her drug to knock Patsy out because she knows he can't leave until he thinks she's dead.
Right.
Now, for what it's worth, this was real dangerous on Jessica's part because she does not know how much of this drug to give.
Right. Or, I didn't know how much she had.
Yeah.
So if she uses it here, does she have enough left to incapacitate
I think in
Kilgrave?
this episode, I think she had 2 doses, and I think she used both. So I think she's going to have to get some more next episode.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yeah. And she uses it once here, and then she uses it again but first she says, Patsy's dead. You killed her, because she knows that's going to send him, because he's been programmed to return after he's killed her. And of course, she jumps him and slips Trish's phone on him so that she can hear what he's doing and track him where he's going. And so she goes to Kilgrave's apartment and she sees him. He does his report, and then Kilgrave tells him to leave and says, "Nope, not that way." and goes to have him jump out.
So sadistic.
Yeah, well, he is a really scary supervillain. You know, the Purple Man, who Kilgrave is. He was just much like the Ringmaster, much like Dr. Faustus, were always these kind of B-rate villains. And Bendis was the guy who said, no, he's not a B-rate villain. He's the most frightening supervillain in the world. He just never really had any potential. And this is something that like Shooter did with the Molecule Man in Secret Wars, which was like there are these characters who have insane amounts of power, but they've always been treated as kind of a joke because they're kind of joke characters. They're not particularly interesting. So like the Molecule Man can control every molecule in the universe, but he's always been sort of he's always been the schlubby dude. But, Shooter was the guy who said, well, yeah, he's a schlubby dude, but he's still the most powerful being in the universe, and let's explore that. And they did some great arcs with the Molecule Man over the years.
Well, see, here's where the problem becomes when you create a character that powerful, and the choices of what you can do with him are so, unlimited that it becomes hard to tell a story that seems believable because something else you could be doing that would be more effective or better. It's just a crazy thing to wrap your head around, someone having that kind of power.
Well,
and how do you tell an interesting
and of course the way you tell that story is that
when everything is a possibility.
Yeah. Well, what you do, and this is one of my favorite lines from the old guidebook to the Marvel Universe. Every so often you would read these entries on a supervillain, and they would always have this line. It was a repeated line throughout many of them, and says, after gaining these amazing superpowers, because the villain was not particularly creative, immediately turned to using his power to rob banks. And that's essentially what you have with Kilgrave. Now, the thing with Kilgrave is that, and what they do with this translation of it is this fact that Kilgrave doesn't want to conquer the world. He just wants to walk through his life, and everyone he meets does what he says. And it is at once the most terrifying power in the world and a totally believable power that someone could have. It is totally that nothing that happens in this is so horrific. I mean, like where it would like cause everyone to like, oh, we must all unite to destroy him. No, because he's just messing with individuals' lives. He's not taking over the city. He's not taking over the country. He's just some poor girl from Podunk, wherever, comes to school, the big city, and now he's his plaything. And quite frankly, the number of girls that come to the city that don't meet Kilgrave, who wind up disappearing, how would you even know? You know what I mean? And that's what it comes down to. Anyway, so Jessica goes, she stops Will, she goes after Kilgrave. Kilgrave runs. All the people that are in the house basically try to defend Kilgrave so he can make his escape. Important point that she has to make her escape. And she winds up using her last bit of the drug, that at least I think, on Will after she's incapacitated everyone else. And she basically tells him, you completed your job, you killed her. Well, she doesn't say you killed her. She says you jumped, you're done, you don't have to be under his power anymore. And our final thing, now of course he wants to figure out, and we're going to get more of that in the upcoming episodes, but the final thing in this episode is, of course she goes back to Luke, and they have some more, and, we really get to see what happened with her and Reva. And it is annoying to me that it's two different actresses playing Reva between this and Luke Cage.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't realized until now. And it does bug me a bit, but, life continues. And we see what happened to Reva, which was basically Jessica Jones killed her for whatever reason, and we'll find that out later.
Yeah.
And then she walked away from Kilgrave. And Kilgrave is telling her to come back, and she doesn't, and then, of course, Kilgrave gets hit by a bus.
Yeah.
And that's what we...
See, it looked like she was walking into the bus. Like she was trying to kill herself just to get away from him.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ambiguity is
That's what I thought.
I think there is this idea in here that, yes, there is, much like we saw in this week's episode of the Gamma Cast, sometimes the weight of it is so much you really want to get away.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mozz, we've gone
Especially after seeing yourself do that, you're just like, how many more people am I going to hurt?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's where Banner found himself on GammaCast in the episode The Psychic. It was, I may have killed someone. In this case, Jessica knows dang well she killed someone. And how can you live knowing that you were pushed beyond your breaking point?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Mozz, final thoughts on this episode?
No, another excellent episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good episode. As we've said, I don't know if we're going to be able to get to it before the end of before Iron Fist starts. We're going to get back to it, maybe, or maybe if you want, maybe we can start doing double episodes, but we can figure out something. But, after that's done, then we've got a couple of weeks before, Defenders. After we do Iron Fist, then we've got Defenders, but I think there's another gap, so we can either come back to Jessica, or that's when we can do Daredevil, but we'll make it all work,
Yeah, but by that time, Punisher might be out.
Yeah, so we'll see how much of this stuff we can get back to, but I'm really enjoying watching Jessica Jones again and talking to you about it with you, Mozz. Okay, Mozz, if people wanted to talk to you about Jessica Jones, how can they find you?
They can email me at mozzmanzor@gmail.com. That's MOZZMANZOOR.
Okay. And, of course, you can always write to me in that old-fashioned email way at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And, of course, if that's too much to remember, just follow me on the Twitters at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEsser. Look for the two E's right there in the middle for quality. Oh, sweet Christmas, friends and neighbors. It's been another episode of the AKA JonesCast, and we really want to be your friends. Talk to you next week.